I show you how to make painting trees so much easier. Let's get started. For a full list of all the materials I'm using and colours and alternative colours, please see the description below. I'm mixing up a puddle of Prussian blue, a puddle of ultramarine, and a very watery puddle of burnt sienna. I'm using rough watercolour paper, 300 grams, and I'm using a flat 1-inch brush, and I'm wetting the sky 2/3 of the way down. Really giving the sky a good soak. I haven't got any drawing here, and if you notice I've got some washi tape around the border so it creates a really nice white edge. I'm loading my brush with the burnt sienna and I'm painting it wet in wet around the sort of bottom part of the sky. I'm also painting it in the middle of the sky now, still tilting to the right hand side. It's very dilute, but it'll kind of give the sky a little bit of warmth. I'm loading my brush with the ultramarine now and I'm painting it at the top of the sky, allowing it to flow down. Really big brush strokes there. So the sky is going to be darkest at the top because it's nearest to us. I'm using a little bit of that Prussian blue, pushing it into the ultramarine, but also painting it on the right hand side. And you can leave little gaps for the white clouds as well. It can look quite effective. And I just like to sort of play here, just literally swiping my brush in just once to allow the sort of paint to run into each other, to mix on the paper, and just to see what happens really. It really does create some quite atmospheric looking skies working in this way. Just gone to my size 12 round brush and just still using those same blues there and just painting sort of smaller gaps now. So as it goes towards the horizon, the gaps between the clouds get smaller, and also the blues will become a paler. So you may want to add a little bit of water to that wash to sort of create a lighter wash. So it'll give the illusion of that blue sky being further away because it's paler. And as you can see, I'm just tilting here. There's a puddle that developed on the right hand side. So I'm just tilting that paint into the middle and adding more of that Prussian blue, just tickling it at the edge of the painting and allow it to run into the sort of lower part of the sky. Rather than going in with my brush there, it looks more natural this way. And I'm adding a little bit of water now and pushing that into the sky as well. So having a little bit of a play. And it's quite nice, especially if you are a beginner starting out, to start off with skies. And if it doesn't go right, just wash it off under the tap and have another go. The paper is already wet, and just begin again with the washes that you may already have in your palette. And just treat it like a practice run. So I'm tilting here and you can see the paint. There's a lot of paint on the paper there and it's just running down to the horizon. So let it run and then you can tilt it to the right again just to get rid of that puddle there. And I'm using a clean damp brush just to pick up any of the puddles there. So I have the background for my trees and now I'm going to paint these sort of grass areas. So I have mixed up some ultramarine and yellow. So it's about 80% ultramarine and about 20% yellow. So it's like a blue-green, and that recedes. Adding a little bit more yellow to that now, just to get sort of more of a mid-green as I'm coming into the foreground. I'm using my size 12 brush. I've just added a touch more of the blue there, getting the colour stronger as it comes into the foreground now. And I'm actually mixing burnt sienna and Prussian blue here, and it makes a beautiful dark green. And I'm going to paint that sort of more damp into wet because it's a little bit creamier than the previous colours, and makes it a little bit darker as a result. So I am mixing up the Prussian blue with some Quinacridone gold. It's quite a sort of a milky consistency, adding a pinch of burnt sienna. So it's quite creamy now. I'm using my size 10 round brush and I'm just going for it. Damp into damp, painting the tree on the left, which is from my imagination. And I recommend doing it like that so it gives you more confidence to paint trees, just sort of painting these sort of rounded shapes. So I'm mixing up here some Quinacridone gold and some ultramarine, and I'm painting this a little bit smaller tree here, damp into damp, so the paint isn't as wet as the sky area. And you can see there's a little sheen on the sky, and that means the sky is damp and not too wet. So I've got the consistency of the paint about the same as the sky area. So I've added a touch more yellow into that quinacridone gold and ultramarine. So I'm varying the colours so they're not all the same side by side, and I've decided to make this tree bigger. So I don't want them all the same height, and it's just a bit of fun to practice these techniques. So I am mixing up some quinacridone gold. You can see it's this paint straight from the tube, so it's really creamy, and I'm mixing up some of the Prussian blue along with the ultramarine, so it's a lovely rich dark green. And I'm painting this damp into damp. You notice I'm using kind of the belly of my brush, and I'm using the brush sideways. I've added a touch more yellow to the right hand side. Working really damp into damp, using some of that green to paint bushes below these lighter trees, adding more ultramarine with that green. So really just going for these darks. I've added a touch of Payne's grey as well, and just painting sort of damp into damp right at the bottom of the trees there to create some darks and shadow areas. And I'm sprinkling some salt onto the damp surface, and that will absorb the paint to create some lovely lighter textures. And I'm actually sprinkling that on the grass area as well. What I'm doing now is I'm tilting the painting to allow that dark green paint to sort of run up, and it creates some lovely natural looking edges. And I'm using a plastic card to lift off the damp paint. So don't do this when the paint is too wet, because it will all just run back in on each other. And don't do it when it's too dry, because it won't work. So you may want to practice this technique, but it's so effective. It could give you a look of maybe silver birch trees, or, you know, lighter tree trunks here and there. You can also scratch into the surface of the paper. It is permanent, but you get these lovely thin lines, and the paint will run into the lines to create that dark line look. So I'm just using this plastic card to draw with as well. It's so freeing up, and I love this way of painting trees. You can just sort of paint these different shapes, different colours, damp into damp. Practice those techniques. Tell yourself you're not even painting trees, you're just having fun, colour mixing, and just sort of painting, exploring different techniques. So as you can see, I'm absolutely loving lifting off with the card. It does take practice, but it is so much fun, and it's worth it. So this is a great big dollop of burnt sienna on my brush there. It's really creamy, and this is tubed paint that I squeeze into the pans. I'm getting a little bit of yellow here as well, mixing it in with the burnt sienna. You've almost got a mustard colour. It's very creamy paint, and I'm using a natural sponge to tap very gently onto the damp surface. I always run my sponge under the tap, wring all the water out so the sponge is damp before I dab it into my paint. I've dabbed it in some to the darker green there as well, just to vary the colours. And as you can see there, you get a really nice sort of texture on the trees. I'm working damp into damp, so that's really creamy paint for the sponge. You don't want it too watery. And it just creates this wonderful texture. I'm almost layering on this damp surface. So the darker paint is behind, and now you've got this sponging on top. Do practice sponging, and you can use a scourer or a synthetic sponge as well. So I am mixing up some more Prussian blue in with that burnt sienna and yellow, adding a touch of Payne's grey. This colour is really dark and creamy, and I'm tapping very, very gently onto the damp surface. Don't press too hard, because you won't get the texture. And I'm just going along the sort of front of those trees to create the look of bushes in front of the trees, darker bushes and sort of darker foliage here and there. And it's really fun to sort of create your own trees using the sponging technique. And I'm using the plastic card again to lift off smaller marks where the sort of bushes are in front of the trees to give the illusion of maybe white fence posts. I've mixed up here some burnt sienna and Payne's grey, quite creamy, and I'm taking the excess paint off the paper towel, and I'm painting damp into damp so the paint doesn't bleed. It kind of stays where it is. That's why I've got it so creamy. Taking the excess paint off again, as you saw, and just sort of using the tip of my brush to paint the top of those branches. It's quite fiddly, so do take your time, and don't worry if the painting dries. You can do this wet on dry. And I'm just painting lots of these smaller branches here and there to bring the trees to life. So you've got the tree trunks that are thicker, and as you sort of paint the branches, as you get to the twigs, just get them smaller and smaller. But just as I say, take your time, don't be in a rush. You may find if you turn your painting upside down, which is what I've done, you may find it's easier to paint the tree trunks and branches. I really do. It's because I'm pulling the paint towards me. I find it's easier to rest my hand, whereas when I'm sort of painting the right way up, I can't rest my hand, and I can actually have my hand sort of shake as well. I don't feel comfortable painting small, thin lines. This way, as you can see, I can rest my sort of wrist and just take my time painting all this detail here, which I love to do, and it's actually quite therapeutic. And what's fun as well is this is just from my imagination. I'm imagining these trees sort of in the middle distance and what they would look like, and just sort of painting in the detail. And as you can see, where I did have the lighter tree trunks and branches where I pulled off with the plastic card, I'm kind of adding some darks to that as well, just to maybe push some back but allow some light to come forward to make it look more natural. It's always a good idea just to turn your painting the right way up, just to have a look at it and maybe add a few more little branches and tree trunks in. And as you can see, I've painted a tree there just right of the centre, slightly larger, and I'm adding another one here right of that. And it's sort of breaking these trees down and adding more detail, creating more interest as well. I thought it'd be a good idea to turn my painting sideways, and this is a really good way of painting straight lines. So I haven't actually got it upside down, I have it sideways, and I can just see if the tree trunks are working. Not everything's leaning in one direction. It's just the way my sort of brain works, that I kind of need to kind of keep changing direction of the painting, especially when I'm painting trees. So I hope you find that helpful. So I've turned it the right way up again, and I'm just darkening up some of these trees here using my size 4 round brush, still using the Payne's Grey and Burnt Sienna. You can use ultramarine and Burnt Sienna as well. I love these little trees here on the right, and it's amazing just the underpainting here with a little bit of sponging and then sort of painting in tree trunks and branches. You can really make this painting look more 3D, and I haven't let it dry yet, so I'm just continuing on using my little size 4 brush. A really good tip, if you have any spots in the sky, little bits of paint, splatters of paint, and I am using the Burnt Sienna and Payne's Grey, and it's kind of a V shape, and I'm using the spot as the center of the bird, the body of the bird, and it's really quite effective, and it really can bring your painting to life. So just going over some of the sort of main trees here with some more darks, just to bring them forward, again creating more depth. Still using the size 4 brush, still using the Burnt Sienna and Payne's Grey. As you saw there, just finishing off with a few darks and details in the foreground and lifting off some paint with my plastic card to add a little bit of light and detail to finish off my painting. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and here is the finished painting. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. And if you'd like to get access to my weekly exclusive tutorials, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching this tutorial. Happy tree painting. Bye for now.